Hello, this is Oliver from Civil, and this is 101 Fallout Facts. Now let's go straight into it. To kick off with, Deathclaws are the apex predators of the wasteland, and people are afraid of them for a very good reason. Now, in the art of Fallout 4, we find out that Deathclaws could have been a whole lot more terrifying. We can see that there was a cut variant known as Deathclaw Mutant, which would have been, as I say, a mutated Deathclaw, and this version would have had 4 arms, a much more deformed, grotesque looking appearance, almost a barbed looking tail, and more of a kind of streamlined, hornless appearance. Now, how this would have fit into the world is unsure, and I've reached out to developers over this and not really got a conclusive answer. But from what we do know, from what we can see in the book, this thing would have been roaming across Boston in the remains of the city and would have been hunted by paratrooper groups who would have hunted it likely for poaching or to bring back for further testing by the Institute, as I personally theorise that they were created by the Institute. As to be honest, it lines up with everything else they're doing in Boston. The move to set Fallout 4 with a bit of a happier, bluer tone in a New England setting was definitely met to some positive response, with those who kind of felt that the heavier, greener settings of Fallout 3 and the yellow settings of Fallout New Vegas were just quite a lot for the player to kind of deal with. Now, ultimately, despite this, the idea for Fallout 4 was originally to have it set in New York, and this was confirmed by Mill, the game designer and writer attached to Fallout 4, who said that one of the original plans in the kind of design documentation for Fallout 4 was to have it set in New York. Which is interesting because New York at this point has been a bit of a question mark as to its status. We've had dribs and drabs of information, whether it's a crater or not. We don't really know exactly the status of the city. Now, it is a population centre, so there is a good chance it got blown up to some extent, but if DC survived, then I see no reason why New York wouldn't exist in some capacity as well. So I think perhaps this is hints that Bethesda haven't completely written off the idea of showing New York. So perhaps in future games, maybe Fallout 5 or onwards, we may potentially see the Big Apple in somewhat of its glory. In a bid to kind of defend the Alaskan pipeline and make sure their oil supplies were maintained, the US began to slowly erode Canada's sovereignty by occupying land near the Alaskan pipeline. Now, this began the year 2059, and by 2077, America completely annexed Canada, using this as their initial reasoning, but ultimately it being a resource-orientated move for them to kind of dominate and control any resources Canada may have. Before the war, Ruzka was a large circus bear who'd spent her time in the circus playing with a large red ball. Now, she continued doing this, even when the bombs dropped and everything got destroyed. In the upper left portion of Point Lookout, you can essentially find Ruzka, a very large, gorlified bear, still playing with her red ball, and unfortunately, a lot more aggressive. FEV, or the Force Evolutionary Virus, is not a perfect mutator by any means, and this is best seen within Vault-87, where you can find a whole spew of failed test subjects where essentially the rapid mutation wasn't uniform, and essentially their bones and muscle outgrew their own skin. It's grotesque, it's awful, but if you do want to see more of it, then I would recommend going and check out Vault-87 Vault 3, because it's a good example to show that people see super mutants as kind of the worst thing that FEV can really do to you as a person. The problem is this is a good example of what can happen, is that the mutation isn't uniform, and you become some sorry mess of a creature that will likely pass during the mutation itself. The question of canonity within Fallout is a really difficult one to answer concisely, especially without official confirmation, and one of the biggest elements of this is Fallout Tactics. So Fallout Tactics was released previously before Bethesda took over the series, and as such it makes it hard to clearly define whether it itself is a canon game completely. Now, Emil, one of the main writers involved with the direction of Fallout, has mentioned within his own Fallout timeline on Twitter basically that Fallout Tactics fits within his timeline, and Bethesda have previously mentioned that they see the main events in Tactics being seen as almost flavor material. Now, flavor material essentially means it's canon until they do anything to conflict against it, so kind of take it as you will until they decide otherwise. And Fallout 4 almost seems to lean into this, where Brotherhood of Steel soldiers mentioned that they had previous airships, and that one of these airships crashed in the Midwest. Now, for those who are aware, Fallout Tactics' main plot involves an airship crashing in the Midwest, which is basically kickstarts the whole story. So perhaps Fallout 4, in some way, is actually confirming that Tactics, at least kind of the main plot element, is indeed canon, as we previously assumed. The assault rifle we find in Fallout 4 is very different to the assault rifles we see in previous games, and it was actually going to go by a different name originally, and it would have been known as the machine gun. For whatever reason, they kept the name as assault rifle. So the reason why they ultimately went for having a bigger, bulkier weapon compared to the previous assault rifle is that they wanted a ballistic weapon to fit alongside something like a Gatling laser. So something bigger, bulkier, that looked like it made sense in a power user's hands, and not kind of a small machine gun that didn't look like it really made much sense. Now, why they didn't ultimately go to have a different weapon is unknown, but nonetheless, this is why they went for a bigger weapon in comparison to the previous assault rifle. The Republic of Dave are a rather isolated community, and due to their rather isolated nature, they don't really get a chance to kind of share their scientific knowledge with the rest of the world, nor receive any more scientific knowledge. And because of this, they do make some interesting points. And one of the more brilliant thoughts that they have is that they say that the model globe that they have is at least 50 times smaller than the entire planet. So that's not entirely wrong, but the scale's a little bit off. It's actually much smaller than that. Abominations, the rather horrific looking humanoid creatures found within the Mothership Zeta DLC for Fallout 3, are the result of splicing, seemingly, between the aliens that we meet in Fallout 3, known as the Zetans, the horrible green men, and human DNA. The result of this is a horrific frenzied creature that almost seems to hate its own existence, and it screeches at enemies it sees, calling on others to help it, and essentially when it dies, when you kill it, it's grateful and thanks you for doing so. The Brotherhood of Steel are a popular faction with Bethesda and with ourselves, with that being no shortage of an understatement, from the fact that they've appeared in every single Fallout game to date, from Fallout 1 all the way up to Fallout 76. Furthermore, they even have two games largely featured around them, with Fallout Brotherhood of Steel and Fallout Tactics. And there's even going to be a second Brotherhood of Steel game before it ultimately got cancelled. So if you want to have a strong guess which factions can be appearing in Fallout 5, well, I have a very strong bet placed on Brotherhood of Steel. In more ways than one, your son Shaun in Fallout 4 is a little bit of a liar, mainly in the adult stage, and this is best seen in the fact that he says he's unarmed when he first meets you. However, if you kill him and go into his inventory, you find that he actually has an automatic institute pistol in his inventory, which is very against the idea of being unarmed. Found within Fallout Tactics, the Beastlords had a unique ability to control weaker creatures via telepathic suggestion. However, this didn't work on all creatures. In fact, they had to kidnap a matron hairy Deathclaw in order to get the rest of the hairy Deathclaws to follow them. Now, this wasn't a limiting factor to most other creatures, allowing them to have a vast army at their command. Wanamingos, the rather strange creature from the earlier Fallout games, was set to make a reappearance in Fallout 3, as shown from the artwork above. However, these were meant to be a lot more larger and deformed than the previous versions, and would have been more of a singular beast that would have gone around just eating creatures and leaving excrement loot behind that you could go and collect. It would have been almost, I think in my view, a larger behemoth-style creature that would have been a rare sighting. Before Fallout 76, there was Fallout Online, or Fallout Project V13 as it was known, and this was developed before Bethesda took over the franchise and was set to take place in a variety of different locations, one of which was going to be Seattle, and would have featured the first time in the series, or the only time at this point, that we would have seen snow. It would have been a snowy region, and it's a bit disappointing actually that we've not seen or heard mention of this. I think reusing the concepts would have been something I would have liked to have seen, but nonetheless, what's your thoughts? Would you want to see a kind of more snowy region? Do you want to see more different biomes, especially the nuclear winter we keep being promised? What's your thoughts? Plasma weapons may seem a bit crazy in the Fallout universe, but they do actually have some scientific explanation about how they work. So the idea is you take an energy source using energy cells, plasma cores, etc., to superheat gas to the point at which it becomes almost an ionized superheated goop known as plasma within the plasma chamber. This is then channeled out the weapon using a superconducting barrel, which then accelerates towards a target, and the superheated goop will then melt, damage, hurt, and harm the targets. Now, how this would be functional in terms of an actual firearm in the same way like a rifle or a pistol is not entirely known in real life. However, the general physics about how this would work is largely understood and, in my opinion, makes physical sense. Cosmic knives were a unique type of knife provided to Sierra Madre kitchen staff by Big Mountain's facility. Now, one of the key features about this knife was that it had incredibly good heat retention, and what this meant was is if it was put down, it could occasionally just melt through the surface, so staff had to be very careful about superheating these knives, or even just basically heating them, so they didn't just go burning through countertops. In the art book, or the storyboard for Fallout 4, we can see that there was originally meant to be a sequence in which power armor soldiers utilizing water cannons would have fought back protesters who were seemingly trying to get to the vault. Now, obviously, as we know, and we see in Fallout 4 and it's hinted towards, people weren't largely allowed access to the vaults, obviously, so some of them were trying to get in by force and trying to push their way in, and obviously a lot of them, well, most of them were unsuccessful because no one other than the registered vault dwellers made it into the vault. Now, one of the interesting things to note is that this is not the first time and the only time we've seen power armor being deployed to kind of pacify rioters and protesters, as in Canada the same thing was seen when Canada was annexed. If you're ill from radiation sickness, make sure to drink some Brahmin milk. So Brahmins are the two-headed cows we see within the Fallout universe, and for some reason, according to the law, their milk can be used to cleanse yourself of radiation. Now it's worth noting, this only works for in-game radiation sickness, so if you get radiation sickness in real life, then probably seek a doctor or actual medical help. Milk will only help if you have hydration as your biggest symptom. Tesla Power Armor is a power armor used by the Enclave primarily in Fallout 3, where it essentially could do two key things. One is it could absorb incoming energy damage, especially from the pesky Brotherhood of Steel's laser rifles, and essentially disperse it throughout so it didn't actually do more damage to them than it would have normally. Two, using the Tesla coils on the back, it could supercharge the weapons that they have, so the plasma weapons that they have could really pack more of an oomph. Now, I say primarily Fallout 3, as you can find Ganon's Tesla power armor in Fallout New Vegas, and also a kind of Tesla armor can be found in Fallout 4, but this is on a T60 instead, and is found as part of the Automatron DLC. Weeks before Fallout 3's development cycle was about to end, there was a bit of a problem. It was realized that one of the satellite towers of Fallout 3 had a door that led to no interior whatsoever. So, amidst the kind of not sure about what to do about it, lead level designer Joe Berger suggested just grab the graffiti that says F you, slap it behind the door, and let that be that. Now, what was kind of just maybe an off-cuff decision to kind of fix this problem at the time led to one of the best jokes in the Fallout series, where fans expecting some interior that would kind of lead to some hidden treasure or something a bit different, or perhaps a secret weapon, was greeted with a very sharp FU. And it's now become a fan favourite in the community of things to reference from Fallout. FEV, or Force Evolutionary Virus, is the key ingredient to make super mutants, and the super mutants of Fallout 3 in the Capital Wasteland are starting to run low on the stuff. So essentially, in Fallout 3, we hear that the super mutants, through kind of loose conversations and dialogue between themselves, are saying they're looking for the green stuff, which obviously is referring to FEV, and they know that that's how they create more of themselves, and are trying to find more of it so they can kidnap more people and turn it into more of them. However, as far as we know, the only source of FEV in the Capital Wasteland is in Vault-87, so if they don't have any there, then that's probably the last they're going to get for a little while. The NCR, or the New California Republic, and the Brotherhood of Steel have always been, for the longest time on the West Coast, being at risk of beating each other's throats. That's because they're two very large, domineering factions being very close to each other. Now, this all went to a head where, following disagreements over the handling of technology, following the collapse of the Enclave on the West Coast and all their technology becoming available between the factions, the Brotherhood of Steel essentially fought a long and intense conflict against the NCR, as they felt themselves that they were best to handle this sort of technology, and essentially it became also a territory dispute between the factions. How did Arthur Maxson get the scar on the side of his face? Well, apparently, according to the Brotherhood of Steel, this was gained from him fighting a Deathclaw at the age of 13 by himself. And as I said, he actually defeated this Deathclaw by himself at the age of 13, I will say again. And this conflict, as I said, left with him having the scar on the side of his face. Now, I will add, this is probably to be taken with a pinch of salt, as it's not probably unheard of for the Brotherhood of Steel to kind of hype up the legend as for the sake of propaganda, so do take it with a pinch of salt. In the Fallout universe, Vaults vary on their purposes and experiments between those that are downright cruel and awful, but may have some use come out of them, to some that just don't make any sense, and they seem like the Vault-Tec were just kind of running out of ideas and just simply want to just try something. And Vault 42 is more in the latter category for this. Now, Vault 42 is mentioned in the Fallout Bible, which is about as canon as you wish to make it, and I won't say any more on that. Now, Vault 42, for some reason, involves a vault which only has light bulbs that are 40 watts and below. That's it. So whatever you want to attach to that, whatever meaning you think they could deduce from that, the rest is really for you to understand. In Fallout 76, if you look up at the rocks on Seneca Rocks, you can essentially see that there's a strange large vulture-like creature almost pinned to the side of the cliff. Now, this is actually a reference to one of the earlier designs of the Scorched Beast, where, if you look at the concept art, it was originally envisioned for it to be more vulture-like than bat-like. Fallout Van Buren is what would have been Fallout 3 if Bethesda hadn't taken over the series and done their own Fallout 3. Now, because of this, there's a lot of plot elements and characters that would have appeared in Fallout Buren, but have appeared in things like Fallout New Vegas. And one of these is Joshua Graham. Now, Joshua Graham, unlike his counterpart in the Honest Hearts DLC, who is kind of quite likable, quite respectable, quite a stoic character, is very different in Van Buren. In Van Buren, he would have been pretty much hated by most people, as he would have often antagonized them, so it would have made it very difficult to travel around with him as a companion. However, he would have been very powerful. I personally would have kept him, but would have made interacting with all of the groups very difficult in the game. It seems like Bethesda seems to like to start with power armor when designing their games, and this is seen in particular with Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, where in Fallout 3 they say that the T-45 power armor was the first armor to be designed for the game. And in Fallout 4, the T60 power armor was the first asset to be created for Fallout 4. And also, I think when you combine it with the fact that they like to keep using the power armor for the covers, it seems like they have an affinity for power armor on the whole. The NCR, or the New California Republic, and the Brotherhood of Steel had a long and intense war over deciding about how to deal with technology. However, unfortunately, the Brotherhood of Steel, despite having the early technological advantage, began to lose because they didn't have the manpower to begin replacing the soldiers that they lost. Because obviously, unlike the NCR, who can call upon their reserves, the Brotherhood of Steel have no such ability, and they really struggle to to actually find the people to fill in the ranks that they lost, as they have no such reserves. But B, as the Brotherhood of Steel have to do a lot more higher level training than the NCR do, considering the fact they have to worry about power armor training, the use of energy weapons, and the like. And so simply the fact that they couldn't upskill people fast enough meant that they became swamped by numbers and simply outmanned. So by the year 2281, their bunkers are being breached and they're a shadow of what they once were. Vault 95 was a vault intended to act as a rehab program for those who suffered with chem addictions. However, Vault-Tec, being Vault-Tec, didn't really have chem addictions solving in mind and had something else as an ulterior motive. And that was, during their recovery, they would be tested by an undercover Vault-Tec agent with a stash of chems. And as I said, this stash of chems would be exposed to the Vault dwellers to see what they would do about it. Now, due to the lack of any clear survivors and based on the terminals, it's quite clear that once the chems are found, everything one pots up. And there's even terminal notes people cursing Vault-Tec for the clear deception and experimentation that they're doing on them when they assumed it would just be a matter of help. Harold is a rather strange mutant in the Fallout universe and is one of the longest running characters that we know of. However, what he is exactly is not entirely clear. What we do know is, due to some exposure through the false evolutionary virus, he became this weird tree-man hybrid. Now, the thing to note, and the thing we make a point of here, is that the way he kind of works and the way he can kind of see is he has a sense of omniscience, in the sense that he is able to see, in a kind of a weird sense, through every tree that sprouted from the tree that kind of grows out of him. So to understand that better, essentially his tree can drop sprouts and grow more trees. And in fact, in Fallout 3, we find this community called Oasis, which comes from all the trees that he sprouted. He says that he can see through all of these trees. The highest rank within the Brotherhood of Steel is known as the High Elder. So all the elders within the Brotherhood of Steel from all the different chapters should answer to the High Elder, who leads from the West Coast in the Lost Hills bunker alongside the Elder Council. The Elder Council is the ruling group of elders who essentially the High Elder is the chairperson of. So even though I say chairperson in kind of a reductionary way, he still has kind of a leadership position, and his role is essentially to steer the overall direction about how the Brotherhood of Steel is going across the entire nation. Vaults in the Fallout universe were ridiculously expensive, and Vault-Tec were essentially given a blank check to make them as quickly as possible due to the benefits they could have, or the benefits they should have, to the general population. And a key example of this is Vault 13, which had a final cost, or a final planned cost, of $400 billion, and it ended up being 160% of this budget in the end, estimating around $645 billion to construct one single vault. Now, I can imagine this is obviously taking into account the fact that inflation in the Fallout universe is absolutely crazy. Just look at the kind of the fuel and coolant prices, but it's still nothing to kind of shy away from the fact that it was still 60% over the price. In Fallout 3, in Vault 106, if you happen to be exploring or traveling around by yourself and you wander into this vault and you shut the door behind you, then you're stuck, unfortunately, because unlike many other vaults, there's no way to open this vault from the inside. So if you do happen to go inside and you shut the door, then you're stuck because there's no control panel. So unfortunately, you kind of get the real Vault 101 experience as it was intended, which is no one's ever going to leave. Vault 76 was debuted at the 300-year anniversary of the founding of the US and was intended to be a control vault, meaning there was no experiment attached to it, unlike many other vaults, and was actually filled with some talented individuals who were tasked to rebuild Appalachia upon leaving the vault, i.e. you. However, the Overseer was given a bit of a different goal compared to you, which was to secure the nuclear silos and take it from any local authority that might try to stop them. The Enclave have had a hand in creating the Deathclaw intelligent variant and the mind control Deathclaw variant. However, they didn't actually create, despite there being some confusion about the fact, the actual original Deathclaws themselves. And this is something even the Enclave have pondered over, saying that they are very similar in terms of how they're made, in terms of genetic splicing and modification. It's similar to the way they do things. However, they have noted themselves that they were not involved with the creation of the Deathclaw, and this was simply a pre-war US military project and not something they themselves had a direct hand in. Deathclaws are terrifying, aggressive, and very, very dangerous killing machines in the wasteland, but the intelligent Deathclaws are not. So the intelligent Deathclaws were created by the Enclave to be more intelligent killing machines that they could deploy upon the mainland to take out key threats. But the intelligent Deathclaws chose not to do that. Instead, they settled in their tribe in Vault 13, just chilling. And Goris is one of them. Goris is an intelligent albino Deathclaw who simply wants to understand humanity, what they're up to now, and study their culture. And if you employ him, he can follow you as a companion and essentially going around in his little robe to disguise himself, telling others that it's just a deformity, which is why he needs the robe. He will explore, and in a scholarly way, he'll better try to understand the waste and humanity that occupy it. And if push comes to shove and you're threatened, he'll throw off that robe in a very cool fashion and shred any enemy to bits. Compared to other factions that have either dominance or power or control in the waste, the Followers of the Apocalypse simply focus on providing medical attention and education for those in the waste who need it. Now, they have had some particular stickler members, such as Edward Sallows, who went on to become Caesar in the name of Caesar's Legion, but nonetheless, their goal hasn't changed. In a rather chaotic, good way of staying out of any major kind of wars going on, they simply want to help others and give aid wherever possible. Bloodbugs, the very pesky insects found in Fallout 4, were the first insects actually designed for Fallout 4, and they acted as the first testers for kind of the AI flying creature behavior in the game, and essentially posed to me nothing more than a very big pain in my ass. Deathclaws are kind of a combination of a few different creatures. They're primarily mutated from Jackson's chameleons. However, due to the mutation, most of them have lost the ability to camouflage. However, you can come across some rare chameleon Deathclaws that have retained this ability, which means they can actually blend into their environments in a variety of different colours shown on screen to best jump you and attack you. So if you thought it was difficult facing a Deathclaw, just wait till you got a colour changing one. T65, a new power armor introduced in Fallout 76, was actually created for the Secret Service in order to protect Vault 79. Now, Vault 79 was where all the gold bullion from Fort Knox was stored, so there's good reason why they want to keep it safe. Created by Robco Industries and General Atomics International for the US Army, Liberty Prime must be nothing less than the most powerful combat robot the battlefield had ever seen, and had the express goal of liberating occupied Anchorage from its Chinese aggressors. Now, unfortunately, it never actually saw this kind of frontline use because it ran into some quite severe power supply problems, and despite scientists suggesting that it could just walk around and just stomp on the commies, this wasn't taken very well, and unfortunately it never saw mass use. But fortunately, that's why we have Fallout 3 and 4, so we can see it in all its glory. In Fallout 4, Vault 81 has a secret that you should know about. And that is, any and all quests related to Vault 81 will reward you with exactly 81 XP upon completion if you have 1 intelligence, and that is meaning no XP boosting perks. So literally no matter what the quest is, they've made it so you get 81 XP for completion. Who said Brotherhood Steel soldiers can't have fun? So in Fallout 4, posted by Night Dead Crew on the Pridwin's Recreation Terminal, it's revealed that several Brotherhood soldiers were involved in a competition to see who could survive the highest fall in a suit of power armor, and apparently the record is currently held by Petrus, who fell from the Pridwin all the way down to the ground, which is quite pathetic when we know that we've done much higher than that from much taller buildings, so this is a chicken feed compared to what we can do. In Fallout New Vegas, you can find a laser rifle which shoots green lasers called the AER-14 prototype, and this is found within the absolutely horrible Vault 22, filled with plants that just want to eat you. Will there be any more intelligent Deathclaws in Fallout? So unfortunately the only source I have for this comes from the Fallout Bible, so do take this as you will. So by the end of Fallout 2, due to the fact that there are no other endings available from the other endings being glitched, all the intelligent Deathclaws other than Zion and Goris are wiped out by the Enclave. Now, what does this mean for the intelligent Deathclaws? Well, the Bible mentions 2 potential endings to them. One, that the species is gone forever. That's the last of them between Zion and Goris. And that's because they're both male and they see that's being that. Mainly also from the fact that the author hated the idea of the intelligent Deathclaws, so was kind of glad for the idea of them being gone. But the Bible also mentions possibly that the intelligence gene was male specific and dominant, meaning that there is hope. If they breed with a female Deathclaw, that they could perpetuate their species and we could still see more of them. So I'm clinging to the latter. Whatever you want to cling to is up to you. Mama Murphy is one of the strongest characters in all of Fallout apparently even stronger than Frank Horrigan himself. Well, there's a reason for this. So her strength is for some reason 19, which is a crazy number, and considering the fact that yours itself typically caps around 10 in Fallout 4 without any kind of additional boosts, that is a shocking number. Now, the reason why hers is bigger than Frank Horrigan is because Fallout 4's strength is calculated a little bit differently to the earlier games, meaning she does get a bit of an unfair advantage. But nonetheless, it's still terrifying to think why hers is still high in the first place. So maybe the chems, if anything, just keep her at bay. Are there ghosts speaking to us from beyond the grave in Fallout? So, if you approach the graves at cemeteries in Fallout New Vegas, such as the Goodspring Cemetery, you may occasionally hear faint, spooky whispering from beyond the grave. Now, if you listen really quietly, you can kind of make faint kind of voices out in the background. It's not clear exactly what they're saying. Maybe they're saying something along the lines of, "Stay away from my grave," or "Put that shovel away, why are you trying to loot my grave?" They could be saying all sorts of things, but we'll never truly know. The eventual mutation of crustaceans into Mirelurks was foreshadowed before even the Great War itself, and this was observed by the Nahan Oceological Society, where they noted that there's a drastic increase in mass for the local crustacean population due to radioactive pollution from local companies such as Poseidon Energy. Now, how did the local people respond to this? Well, they're ecstatic. They thought bigger, fatter, juicier crabs, when actually they were bigger, but they were just more radioactive. The main red scorpions we see in game are mutated versions of the pre-war North American emperor scorpion. However, we do see other species in the games, such as the bark scorpion that we can see in Fallout New Vegas, for example. Symbiont behemoths are the oldest and strongest of their kinds, and essentially symbionts that have lasted the longest, rather than being kind of a very strong mutation. They're just those that have lived long enough to kind of keep accelerating and growing beyond kind of the initial stages of mutation. Now, this is best seen in the Vault-87 variant in Fallout 3, where they've been known to grow as large as 20 feet tall. Petrified corpses in Fallout 76 and Appalachia are the final form of the mutagenic Scorched Plague infection, and this is where the victim is left too long without any sort of ailment or protection or cure, and so in time their entire body becomes a radioactive husk as the infection has replaced all their cells with a radioactive glass-like ultracite. Despite being cut from Fallout 4 during development, the grotesque Institute Centaur, which has been shown in concept art, has fortunately been recreated by modders. Now, this thing would have been essentially one of the Institute's many horrible offsets that they kind of just cast out. And by the looks of it, it's just a mixture of God knows what. Probably people based on the hands, maybe kind of some frog based on the face, who knows. And based on their moral history and that of their messing around with the false evolutionary virus, I have no doubt this probably would have came from the Institute as just another horrified, grotesque abomination that they created and then just cast out into the Commonwealth for the people to deal with. According to the Fallout Bible, in 2065, New York City's radioactive reactor went supercritical for about 5 minutes due to excessive power demand, but it's eventually settled. The term supercritical is an interesting point to make here, and it's worth saying that supercriticality is not necessarily like a key bad thing. It's something that some nuclear reactors do go through, especially some of their startup phases. It essentially means that the production of neutrons in the reaction is basically exceeding that's being consumed. So essentially, you get more neutrons than you want, and this is something that does sometimes happen in nuclear reactor startups. I can go into this with a bit more detail in an actual video, but obviously I just want to explain that it doesn't necessarily mean that New York was about to blow up. It is believed that some of the Enclave's more advanced technology and weaponry is actually based upon captured alien technology. Now, when I say alien, I refer to the Zetans that we've encountered in the Fallout series already, and they have some very, very advanced weaponry to the point it dwarfs what we potentially have as humans. But the US government have captured for the universe Zetans in the past, so it's no surprise to hear that apparently the Enclave has managed to reverse engineer and utilize some of this technology to enhance their already very powerful tech. Both Cricket and Trashcan Carl in Fallout 4 are very, very annoying in my opinion, and I now have a reason to dislike them, and is that they, along with all of the travelling merchants in Fallout 4, are all informants for the Institute's Synth Retention Bureau, which essentially are just those who are being paid by the Institute to spy on since they may have escaped and report back to the Institute, like grubby little spies. So honestly, I can't deal with them, and I don't let them into my settlements anymore. In Fallout 4, how do the crows look? Do they look cute? Do they look petable? Do they look like little precious birds that you want to go and say hello to? Well, they're not. They're watcher crows. Crow spies for the Institute that are watching you and everything that you do. And although you may think there's a conspiracy, or maybe it's just one or two of them, actually the designer behind them actually said that there was originally meant to be two classes of crows, watcher crows and normal crows. However, they eventually decided against this in design phases and ultimately decided that every single crow that you encounter in the game is a naughty little Institute spy that's watching you and everything that you do. As we know by now, most corporations in the Fallout universe are downright horrible, and the pharmaceutical company known as Med-Tek is no exception to this. So they would essentially supply school districts with free samples of mentats to get the students hooked on this wonderful intelligence boosting chem. The problem is this chem is very, very addictive. Now, the students seeking to keep their intelligence boosted for exams and tests, but also to keep their high going, would buy these mentats then for full price once they got the samples. Now, eventually recognizing the social difficulties involved with all this, Med-Tek would turn around and they would sell them their fixer cure that would essentially wipe away the addiction, but then simply resupply them with more samples. The destruction of Shady Sands in the Fallout TV show was a controversial move, and is one that annoyed some kind of hardcore older fans who felt this kind of came out of nowhere. However, this was not going to be when this was going to happen if Bethesda didn't take over the franchise. So in Fallout Van Buren, the cut Fallout 3 before Bethesda took over and made their Fallout 3, was going to include a key kind of plot element, and that was Shady Sands was going to be destroyed via nuclear blast, very similar to what happened in the TV show. Now, this move would have kind of forced the NCR to kind of move away from that sort of direction and more towards Hoover Dam. So if anything, it would have happened sooner, if anything, but a little bit shifted around where the NCR moved away from Shady Sands area because it got destroyed, where it seemed to happen the other way around, where in the TV show it seemed to be that the NCR had already begun to move kind of their capital and was starting to move more towards the Mojave, and then it got destroyed. Fallout 76's The Mire has a rather strange variety of plant life, from the strangler hearts that try to kind of hive mind creatures to vine systems that have lifted towers out of the ground. Now, what caused this? Well, Fallout 94 has a garden creation kit known as a GECK. Now, a GECK is a terraforming device meant to basically mass change regions to be livable. Now, how did this create this region? I'll tell you. So what happened is this vault, quite pacifist and quite friendly, try to invite other people in the surrounding region into their vault to show them kind of the ways of life, how to grow things, botany, the like. Now, they invited the town of Harper's Ferry into their vault, and when Harper's Ferry inspected their vault, they thought their pacifist nature was due to mind control, and scared of being controlled themselves, they blamed the GECK for this whole thing and thought that was controlling them, and then opened fire on the GECK. Now, what happened when they opened fire on the GECK? Well, it malfunctioned because you shouldn't shoot things like that, and this led to it spewing out this horrible thick fog that mutated the entire inside of the vault, but more importantly, spread this fog amongst the entire region, known as the Mire, and this terraformed the entire region, but in a very bad way. So instead of making it more livable, the plant life became more ferocious, more aggressive, more extreme, and thanks to some idiots who shot at GECK, we now have a very hostile region. Ugwa in Fallout 76 are these big turtle-like things, and they seem to be derived or mutated from snapping turtles in some capacity. Now, the cult of the Mothman seem to think they have some divine properties in their blood, and so because of this, they actively hunt them for sacrifice in the name of the Great Mothman. Now, we can put a stop to this because this is mean, and Ugwa are a pretty cool creature in my opinion, but the Ugwa still try to eat you anyway, so decide who you really want to be saving here, yourself or the Ugwa. In Fallout New Vegas, you can find Fallout 2's Enclave Advanced Power Armor Mark 1 in a couple of different locations because they're split. So one key way is you can find the Tesla variants by joining kind of Ganon and that whole Enclave questline, but if you don't want to do all that faff, you can also find them in two different locations. So you can find the main armor itself at this location known as Deathclaw Promontory, which is across the river from the Cliffside Prospector Camp, and as I mentioned, it has Deathclaws there. And you can find the helmet at Silver Peak Mine, which is full with friendly things, so go to both of them, have a great time. But the armor's pretty cool, so I definitely think it's worth it. Found within Fallout 2, the Temple of Trials is a testing area to discover those who are worthy to lead the village of Arroyo. Now, within this temple is notably the Vault suit belonging to the Vault Dweller is in the protagonist from Fallout 1, and he essentially is immortalized within this temple, and a further piece of immortalization within this is that his face is carved in stone above the entrance. Wendigos are horrifying mutated humanoids that essentially plague Appalachia in Fallout 76, and with their stretched skin and elongated limbs, you'll be surprised to learn, or perhaps not, they're humans, not just any old humans, cannibals. And essentially they would go around overly consuming human flesh. Now, not just any flesh, radioactive flesh. Now, through this overconsumption of radiation, through the consumption of the radioactive human flesh just after the war, this in turn led to them mutating in a way not normally seen in ghouls, for example. And this kind of radiation mixed with the hunger led to this horrible deformed creature that is a mere shadow of what human once was, and is now some gangly, overgrown creature that only seeks to consume more. Within the Fallout universe, there's mention of occultic deities or gods that are always watching, always present, and are influencing and corrupting those of the mortal plane. Now, one of these is Okwoltoth, a name that seemingly comes straight from Lovecraftian horror. Now, Okwoltoth is a forgotten occultic god like many, and he seemingly is about. There's a lot of references in kind of from Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and even in Fallout 76 of his presence and his effects on others. Now, not only this, and not only are people hunting for him, but his followers claim that Okwoltoth is returned, and that we should be afraid. In the Fallout TV show, shortly after Lucy leaves Vault 33 in the episode The Target, a derelict Assaultron can be found broken and left in the dust, just in the kind of the side view. Not only this, but this was actually created by a fan account who creates different cosplay and prop items, known as No Sleep Till Cosplay, so definitely check them out, and it's fantastic this was used for the show. As of recording this, the Fallout 2 Remaster mod, Project Arroyo, is still looking to introduce Fallout 2 into Fallout 4's engine, and is set to be released on Steam due to its size. At the point, as I said, of recording, it currently has over 100 volunteers involved in this development, which involves a full remake of Fallout 2, as I said, in Fallout 4's engine. When it was announced that Bethesda would be taking over the Fallout franchise and leading with Fallout 3, not everyone was particularly happy about this. And this was mentioned by Joe Burgess, who was the lead level designer for Fallout 3. And he mentioned that at the news that they're taking over the series, Bethesda received a whole deluge of hate and death threats, and just essentially pure hatred. And even though I tried to make these facts objective generally, I think it's worth noting that if you send death threats over someone taking over a game series, then go outside, touch grass, roll around in that grass, really live with the grass, and just stay in the grass for like a long time, please. Have you ever wanted an underwater vault with a squid to be the overseer? Well, that could have potentially happened. It was mentioned by Todd Howard when discussing cut content and what potentially would have been cool to see in Fallout 4 that didn't make it. Todd Howard essentially discussed that there was meant to be an underwater vault known as Vault 120. And as I said, it's going to be underwater. And obviously, to go along with this, as obviously it should be going along with it, the overseer was going to be a giant octopus or a giant squid. So maybe in Fallout 5, we'll see kind of more bizarre overseers. I certainly would want to have seen this. I'm obviously a little disappointed we didn't see this. What's your thoughts? Is there something you want to see in the game? Because that's something I want to see in a future game. This, though, or the fully integrated security technotronic officer, unfortunately a fan favourite to a lot of people who play Fallout New Vegas, can apparently be upgraded to improve his unique services, I'll put it like that. But unfortunately within the game you're not able to do this, so that's probably one of the worst potentially piece of content that's ever been seen in a Fallout game. There seems to be some confusion about what Archimedes is in Helios 1. Now, Archimedes is a satellite weapon system developed by Poseidon Energy, which utilizes the solar power generated from Helios 1 to deploy an intense energy blast. Archimedes 1 was the defense mechanism to stop misuse or messing around or anything attacking Helios 1. And that's what you use if you want to really annoy Arcade Gannon or to wipe out the NCR just in general around the sites. Archimedes 2 was a limited range variant of this that used a Luciad's Sea Finder to find a target, and then using a silly little green gun, you call in an orbital laser strike. So Archimedes 1 is a defense mechanism and is localized to Helios 1. Archimedes 2 was the one you can use to just blast random people and is quite glitchy. In Fallout 3's Afterword, which is essentially an epilogue piece written for the game, it states that it's not clear whether the Lone Wanderer is a man or a woman, much less a saint or a monster. Now, this obviously meant to be the fact that they don't want to put down a particular ending definitively about who you are as a person and the path you take, because that's part of the choice and part of the role-playing experience. But it's also obviously open to the fact that it could be any gender, you could be any karma ending, it doesn't really matter. However, it's worth mentioning the fact that I personally think that the canon ending is that you're actually a centaur that assists the Paradise Falls slavers to go and capture more people, and that's the canon ending in my opinion. Vault 87 is one of the most radioactive places in Fallout 3. In fact, in pretty much the entire Fallout franchise, it's one of the most radioactive areas that we can actually walk up to and have to deal with. Now, if you go right up to the front door, it's pretty much impossible to survive, and you'll die from the radiation pretty much immediately. However, it's interesting to note that despite this, the toilets and sinks within Vault 87 actually have less radioactive water than most other sources in the wasteland. So if you want to have some of the lowest radiation affected water, then go to the one of the radiated places in Fallout 3. I don't know how that makes sense. That's not what I'm paid for. In Fallout New Vegas, Veronica mentions that the Brotherhood deal was originally planning to take Hoover Dam for its hydroelectric potential, However, they switched focus to Helios 1, especially under Elder Elijah's leadership, for what it potentially could offer them. Now, ultimately, whether that's the best goal is to be decided. I think obviously either way they would have lost because Hoover Dam and Helios 1 had potential for the NCR, so they would have ended up fighting the NCR regardless anyway. Nate's an interesting character from kind of the theorized idea that he might be a war criminal, which was roughly alluded to on Twitter, but I won't get into that. And one of the more interesting parts of his backstory is that, according to a dialogue between himself and his wife Nora, their son Shaun was seemingly conceived in a park. So I'm just going to leave that there. The settlers that would eventually found the NCR, or the New California Republic's Shady Sand settlement, came from Vault 15. The interesting thing to note is that some of their biggest rivals that they face in terms of the raider groups, such as the Khans, Jackals, and Vipers, also came from the same vault, and likely would have shared kin in their ancestors. So it's interesting to see that, obviously, as they have grown to hate each other and fight each other, they likely live with each other, at least their ancestors once did. During a site visit to the construction of Vault 76, Vault-Tec Assistant CEO Giles Wollstonecroft was abducted by Zetan aliens, and he was not seen again, so obviously it's worth noting that the site visit didn't go very well at all. In Fallout 4, in the Glowing Sea, there's a marked location known as Vertibird Wreckage, and despite being a marked location, it seemingly has no items, containers, interactions, or scripted enemies, leading some to believe it's nothing more than just a fast travel location. Franchises and games in particular have their unanswered questions, their big whys or big question marks. Elder Scrolls has their where did the Dwemer go? Fallout has its what were the vaults intended for exactly? Now, the creator of the Fallout series, Tim Kaine, said that the originally planned purpose of the vaults was to perform experiments, which would then aid the Enclave in preparing for a multi-generation starship journey, testing different factors and parameters about how humanity can survive under the extremities of environments. Now, it's not known at this point if that's still the reason the vaults were commissioned. We are yet to find out. In Fallout 3, in an alley in Seward Square, can be found a preacher spouting seemingly mad ramblings to anyone who will listen. However, if you do decide to go down the alley to have a little listen to what he might be spouting on about, he's rigged the alley to blow, with 5 frag lines and 5 mini nukes, which just blow anyone who come near them. Absolute kingdom come, so just ignore him. Just don't pay him attention, just leave him be. In Fallout New Vegas, interestingly, Joshua Graham is the only companion to have good karma. Every other companion has neutral karma. So despite all he's done in the first battle of Hoover Dam and his efforts under Caesar's Legion, he's very sorry, and he means well now. Fallout New Vegas had 18 months to develop, and this essentially meant that any way they could kind of cut down on the development cycle or reuse assets, they did so in order to optimize the time they had. Now, one of this was that the Spore carriers in Vault 22, and shown in the DLC Honest Hearts and Old World Blues, is actually a reskin, a straight reskin of the Trog seen in Fallout 3's DLC, The Pit. There are some rather strange creatures cut from Fallout 4, and nothing I think as strange as Maypole, who is set to be a 300 feet tall ghoul who would roam with a horde of ghouls encircling it, and this was envisioned by Jonah Loeb, who essentially designed it to be something inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, and Maypole is going to be this massive grotesque beast that you'd face with a whole horde of ghouls following it around that you'd have to defeat all of them. Now this was obviously cut due to technical issues, because how the hell this would work in game, I have no idea. The Nightkin at the Rep Contest site were there for a very specific purpose, and this was to get hold of a shipment of stealth boys that was meant to be there, and this was based on an invoice they found, because as we know, Nightkin are obsessed with staying invisible and getting hold of any more stealth boys that they can to maintain this invisibility. Now, unfortunately, what they didn't realise and didn't find out yet is that the shipment that was meant to arrive there was actually returned to Robco, so it was never there in the first place. So unfortunately, the slaughtering that they exhibited upon the Brotherhood there was completely unnecessary, and it was all due to their mistake and not realising that there's no stealth voice there in the first place. In Fallout 4, Deacon claims to know one of Mr. House's override codes, and even recites this in a special dialogue option when speaking to Deezer and Covenant. He doesn't say anything more about what this is and how he got it, other than that he won it in a game of poker. In Fallout New Vegas, it was originally going to be possible for the player to convince Mr. House to spare the Brotherhood of Steel. Unfortunately, Obsidian decided not to go ahead with this, and meant it so you had to destroy the Brotherhood of Steel for Mr. House, because they wanted the player to be forced to make a difficult decision. The Tesla Cannon is a powerful pre-war shoulder-mounted energy weapon, intended to be an anti-tank and anti-infantry weapon, with its energy blasts being able to obliterate absolutely anything, searing with electricity. with one modified variant even being capable of taking down vertibirds with a single shot. The resource wars were a particularly hard period in which countries realizing the kind of running out of fossil fuels began to go to war each other over that and various other reasons, and this marked extreme economic hardship for civilians in the US and across the world. Now, during this period, White House spokesperson Warren Eccleston announced that the president himself was forced to substitute cube steak for his nightly prime rib, and the only one available was a detestable Chateau Montrose 2043. So even he knew the struggles. During an interview with lead writer and designer for Fallout 3, Emil, it was mentioned that the original plan for Liberty Prime was to have him be massive, and that the player was going to be able to ride in his head anime style and shoot down upon the Enclave opposition. In one whoopsie, thus led people to believe that this is core evidence that Soul survives the synth, during the Vault 111 introduction, before the Pip-Boy is acquired mind you, the player is able to use V.A.T.S. And obviously V.A.T.S is provided by the Pip-Boy, and this is the targeting system that allows you to lock on certain limbs and to target them, essentially, as I said. Now, obviously a lot of people believe that being able to use this before the Pip-Boy means that this is core evidence that he's a synth, because synths are said to have their own targeting system akin to this. I see it was a slight whoopsie and they wanted to do the tutorial in the Vault, so take as you will. According to the Vulture's memoirs, Dogmeat in Fallout 1 canonically died in Mariposa military base after running into powerful energy force field, which I'm not gonna lie, I find quite funny, and one of my admins on one of the other accounts I help run absolutely hates it when I mention this fact, because I always giggle when I say it. Why is it so deadly north of Good Springs? Why couldn't you just run to New Vegas? Well, Fallout New Vegas' design director Josh Sawyer thought of this and said that Obsidian scattered Deathclaws, Cazadors, and Civ Mutants north of Good Springs to stop Fallout 3 players from just sliding around the map without feeling any heat for doing so. Unlike Fallout 3, with only 5 unique Civ Mutant behemoths locked to their own locations, Fallout 4 has behemoths that can spawn in a whole variety of locations across the games, and with the majority of them being able to respawn in those spots. Now, some are kind of linked to scripted events, however, as I said, the majority of them will keep respawning, and there's only kind of 1 or 2 specific unique ones, like Swan. What does the ink blot test show to you in the beginning of the base game for Fallout New Vegas? Well, for a lot of players, one of them looked like two bears high-fiving, and we're quite disappointed to find that this actually wasn't really a choice, so much so that a mod was even made to add this as an option. Now, Obsidian, recognising that fans wanted that as an option, actually made an NPC in New Vegas' DLC, Honest Hearts, and this character was known as Two Bears High-Fiving in reference to this. According to Todd Howard, Fallout New Vegas itself began conceptually as a DLC for Fallout 3. In time, himself and others felt that it was more suited as a full-blown game. Now, since posting this elsewhere, people have asked the question, how would this worked? Would it have been kind of a Tales of the Two Wastelands situation? Would it have been kind of like almost a complete different save? Now, I'm curious, and actually I'm putting the ball to yourselves here, how do you think this would have worked in terms of would it launch separately? Would it just been a kind of you load into the area and it's a different character? How do you think it would have worked? According to some content for Fallout New Vegas, there was originally going to be a Brahmin follower called Betsy. She would carry all your belongings up to £600. However, unfortunately, it's not entirely clear why she was cut, whether it's for kind of balancing reasons because you carry so much, whether because a Brahmin slowly wandering around behind you wouldn't be very practical, or it's because they hate us and they want to have nothing in this day and age. Perhaps we're all used to bad managers in real life and having particularly difficult ones who make your life particularly awful. However, none compare, I think, to Frank Davison, the manager at Vault-Tec Regional HQ, who was known amongst his staff for being particularly aggressive. Now, did he eventually calm down? Did he kind of have an epiphany and become better? Well, no, he'd eventually smash a pool cue over one worker's head, and he would jab another one in the neck, so didn't go particularly great for anyone involved. Potatoes are a cross between pre-war tomatoes and pre-war potatoes, with the outer layer of a tomato and the tough flesh of a potato. I'm not gonna lie, that sounds pretty awful. According to the East Coast Brotherhood deal, this is all that's left of either. However, we do know that there are particular specimens that do exist of either of them, and we do find them in labs in Fallout 3. In Fallout 4, there is actually a hidden perk that applies only to Brotherhood Steel members that are on the randomly spawned vertibirds. Now, this perk allows them to take 50% less damage from explosions, which is very, 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 very helpful from the fact that most of them most likely to just crash anyway. The Y-17 trauma harnesses were created by the Y-17 medical facility at Big Mountain as a means to be an automated suit to rescue injured soldiers and actually defend them by mimicking the combat behaviour and bringing them home. The problem is during testing, these suits didn't have a very good idea about where home was, and essentially would begin to go into a bit of a wander mode and would still defend the user, even when the user didn't need to be held anymore and it wouldn't let them go. It also wasn't very good at determining that the user had actually died. So what ended up happening was a bunch of suits that were automated and were just mimicking combat behavior, were wandering around defending its user when the user was either dead or didn't want to be helped anymore, resulting in a bunch of corpses or skeletons walking around just shooting everyone. Now, this is more of an Instagram related fact or just a general story fact, so it's not very applicable to this exactly. However, it's my 100th fact, so I thought I'd do it anyway. So Civilfallout, which is kind of the very core account on Instagram that began all of this content, all of Civil, was started on February 2017. And I just wanted to do this 100th fact just to kind of thank everyone who's kind of supported on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and here on this journey where I've accumulated a little bit of a following. So I just want to kind of thank you all, especially those who've watched out to this point in the video. I just want to say a big thanks to you all. All the support I get means a lot, and I just want to thank you all. In Fallen Rock Cave in Fallen Vegas' Honest Hearts DLC, you can find a blue laser pistol called the Compliance Regulator. And essentially what happens is when you shoot them, it's meant to have almost a taser effect, which results in them having essentially instant paralysis when being hit by this weapon. So it's pretty useful if you want to kind of immediately immobilize particular foes.